All right. Well, welcome to our closing session today. I want to thank everybody for coming and hope you had a good conference so far. We hope we'll keep this fresh and lively and keep you entertained here for the next little while. Let's see, where are we at? Where are we at?
Columbus.
Columbus. Okay, well, I don't have any paperwork, so we're just going to wing it. Cybersecurity, as we've been talking all day, is so important to all of us. It impacts every bit of everything we have at our stations, from our barracks, which we find all over the internet wide open, to maybe our transmitters, to some other devices. I've been to stations that have been hacked before. It's not a pretty sight when you see people playing things on tape again. So this is key for all of us to get our heads around. So we're going to start. Where are we going to start? Where's the slideshow? Oh, my clicker. Hey, there we go. There we go. Tracy Cleeton is going to start us off from Saga Communications. And he's going to work on this.
Oh, we'll build to that.
Yeah, you going to build to that? Okay.
Hearing exciting and
Yeah, get
terms
close.
for cybersecurity are a little bit unique to me. Energetic. So I came today kind of with the plan that I was going to talk about some of the aspects of how cybersecurity has changed. I was talking to our board yesterday, and for a couple reasons, I kind of decided that there's probably a better path for me to take. One of those is there's really no reason for me to kind of talk about how old I am. But what I want to talk about, because of how fitting it is with talking to the board, is the tone at the top. I think most of us probably actually have a pretty good ideas about where our weaknesses are and what we could be doing to strengthen them. I think our biggest challenges are in communicating those and getting those things to happen. It's leadership, it's financing, it's the challenges around getting the things that we know we need to be doing done. I've been working for Saga since 2008. You'll notice from my slides that I started talking about cybersecurity in 2016. There's a reason for that, and that is that while I had a couple of good sponsors in the business, CFO, CO had some hooks into cybersecurity, didn't have full buy-in, didn't have financing. The things that we were able to do and willing to do were pretty limited, and there just wasn't a strong buy-in. So the reason I started this with that timing is because two things happened. And a lot of times I find that there's catalysts for why we do cybersecurity. We're hacked. We're close to hacked. One of our competitors is hacked. Hopefully the SEC is putting in some new requirements, and hopefully those types of catalysts will also make us more aware of it. But usually there's some type of catalyst that gets management to go, oh, we've probably been missing that. For us, it was two things that kind of coincided. The first was me presenting some layer 3 options to do some basic network segmentation on how to separate out our networks and mitigate the ability for ransomware to travel from the business environment to automation and across markets. About 3 months after I proposed that, we had an incident. It was a small one. It affected one market. We had the same situation somebody else talked about as far as people running a radio station manually, and we were back fully in operation within 24 hours. But it was a good enough catalyst that it changed the CEO's tone, and we started getting buy-in for projects. That happened on a Friday night. We had a PD double-click an email attachment, and suddenly some of the automation and audio files were encrypted. And we were back in business by Saturday afternoon. And one day I got a call from the COO. Hey, you know that list you gave us a couple weeks ago? And like many of you, I broke it down by levels of operation, by cost. And he told me it was approved. I asked which level. He said all of it.
Surprise there, yeah.
Surprise. And then he said, this is going to sound a little insensitive because you gave this to us and we didn't act on it, but we want it all done right away. And I said, I get it. I kind of expected this call. Or this is the better version of the call that I expected today. Because we're kind of put in that spot where it's our job to protect and do things. We propose them, many of them don't get approved, and then we're held accountable for that. So that's one of the reasons that I think getting that buy-in is so important. And one of the things that I find helpful is making the transition. I think you guys probably share some of my natural tendencies to be geeky. We're excited about the technologies, the features of products, how they fit, and kind of the elegance of all of that. The business isn't. The business is interested in the story on how the products are going to help protect them. And as you'll see, we can go ahead and move to the next slide here. About 80%, I would say, of what we do, the only cost is time. You're able to apply a lot of GPOs to harden platforms up. You're able to do a lot to harden an OS. You're able to increase secure password length and those types of things fairly easily. You do have to have an IT will, and you do have to have an audience within management for the pain that that's going to cause. When I started in 08, 09, most of our IT projects went pretty similarly to probably how yours go, in that they don't go entirely smoothly. And one of the things that I found, manufacturing, where I'd come from previously, was pretty tolerant to that. As long as you're always improving and you're doing it better and never having the same problems, it was considered a success. In radio, you would have a PD, an on-air person, a creative talent that has a different level of energy and excitement and intolerance for hiccups. But as we've built a relationship between IT and management, a couple things happened. So the first was, as I mentioned, that we were able to do that basic layer 3 network segmentation, the early kind of groundwork in security. And then shortly after that, I sent out some emails to our management in the markets saying, you need to take these steps. And this was basically the second key to the change. As soon as I sent those out, shortly after that, CEO replied to that and said, you need to be doing these things. If you don't, the COO will be visiting you on Friday, which at our company was code, you won't be there on Monday. And that type of buy-in and that type of commitment from management really started to change the entire scope of being able to do IT projects, security and non-security, things that made for efficiencies, standardization, and it really started to snowball our ability to make IT effective and add value to the business. We've continued to do that. We've now got projects on our table, SOC, microsegmentation, password access management, vaults, honeypots, and we've implemented incident response plans, and we've really made those significant changes towards being more secure. But it really, I think the real sticking point and the starting point of all of it is really getting that buy-in and that tone from the top. And one of the things that you'll find, I think, is that as you successfully build those relationships with GMs, with ownership, board of directors, depending on the size of your company, what happens is those are the people you need to talk to first. You need to be telling them the story. And once you've succeeded in that, then you get to turn around and project to the company with them behind you. If you try to do that in the wrong order, it doesn't really work very well. You're an echo chamber and everybody's ignoring you. So that's really where I'd start with and turn it over to our next guest.
Okay. That would be Dr. John Nichols. Yeah, take the mic, please.
Well, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices and what's coming our way, because we always have to keep an eye on the future now. And so, my background, actually, way back when, 40 years ago almost, I have a background in broadcasting, but since then I've been pretty much an electronic engineer that led me to cybersecurity and becoming a professor. But what threats are out there now, right? We have ransomware, we have phishing, we have all of these things that are coming our way. Yeah.
Okay.
And so how do we keep up with all this stuff, right? It's overwhelming even for somebody like me. There are days when I just can't look at this anymore. So I thought the best thing I could do for all of you is show you all where to find some of this stuff, right? So the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a special publication, 171-800, that is the Bible, really, for cybersecurity. So it would be worth familiarizing yourself with that. It's nothing overwhelming. It's a lot of the stuff that you do all the time anyway, but it's in one nice, neat little piece of documentation. And it talks about hardening your networks, segmenting your networks, a lot of the stuff that Tracy was talking about, and almost all of the state laws and the international laws are built upon this framework. For example, here in Ohio, we have the Ohio Data Protection Act, which what basically means if you follow these NIST standards and you can prove that you followed these standards, which means you've got to document these things, that you will not be held liable if your data is stolen, and personal data. Now, especially if you're in public broadcasting or something like that, where you have a list of donors and that kind of stuff, it's your responsibility to protect that data. If not, there can be liability for it. If, for example, California has the California Cyber Protection Act, New York has SHIELD, Europe has the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Requirement. If you have anybody who is in your system that is a European citizen, it can be up to $400,000 per stolen ID from the European Union that will fine you. Yeah, they have very strict laws. Like in America, we have the opt-out option, right? In Europe, you opt in, right? Very, very different twist on the whole thing. And so your company can be and will be held liable. California and New York have similar laws, but there right now are at least 27 states that have different levels of laws in place to protect that data. We can go ahead to the next one. Now, these are some of the sites that I regularly read. If you haven't read Brian Krebs yet, Krebs on Security is probably the easiest read because he's a journalist and he writes it in language that we all understand. He worked for the Washington Post for years, and he was so blown away by what was going on that he became an expert in the field in cybersecurity. So he reports it there. If you want to get a little bit more down in the weeds, we have the Hacker News, and then the king of all of the places to go to, although it's very technical, is the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, which used to be U.S. CERT at Carnegie Mellon, and that's their focus there. And so if you want to know what's going on, if you don't understand what's happening, the Hacker News is very good resource also.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say also that in these politically charged times, this is not a partisan issue, right? This is not a partisan issue. This is our identities. This is our data. This is your on-air time, right? Which is how you all make money. So I had to quote Sergeant Schultz here: "In times of war, I find it best to not take sides," and that's and that's I think the posture that we all need to take. We have to put our own personal politics aside, because facts are facts, and if you decide to believe some conspiracy theory and your station is off the air for 24 hours, my guess is you'll be looking for work on your LinkedIn profile pretty quickly. So, when is the time to start? Well, 10 years ago, right? But we can't catch up now. And so the best thing to do is you have to plot this out a little bit. You have to take a look at what assets you have. You have to think about where the company is going and put together a nice strategic plan going forward. How do you protect those assets? As we all know, there's a skill shortage. In fact, in Indiana right now, there's a shortage of 41,000 IT professionals. And with people losing or retiring and moving on from the field, they really they have a goal to employ 41,000 IT people in Indiana by 2030, but they're going to lose some people, so they need to replace 52,000 jobs. And so it's a hot field, and how do we do that? Shameless plug here is that we are developing at Ball State a broadcast and media engineering degree track. So if any of you are interested in finding out more, please see me afterwards, and I can get you in touch with the right people, because we need your expertise on the broadcasting side. We have the IT expertise, and we have Phil, who has the broadcasting expertise. But and this is such a big deal. The more heads involved with this, the better off we're all going to be. So we are trying to address this shortage at Ball State.
Nice.
You know, as things get older, they become less secure, right? So there's two ways to address this. Pay attention. If your device has firmware in it and it can be updated, do those updates right away, just like when it comes across in your phone or anything else. And that's everything down to even the printers on the system. Anything that's connected to your internet, you need to update the firmware and the software as soon as you can, which doesn't mean when you get around to it. It means, you know, as soon as that device is not being used, or if you can take it down for a few minutes to do it right then. And this is just a rough guide for you all going forward. I think you can all read that for yourself, but this is the path forward for you all. And just so you know, if you can, do things like encrypt your emails and things like that, that's going to help certain level of security. But quantum computing is coming our way, and that's going to be a whole new level of security issues. Now, I think we're 3 to 5 years off of that, but it would really be worth all of your time to start reading about quantum computing and how when it blends with artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're going to have a handful of hard to handle. And so these are just some of the things that are coming. We have quantum computing, 5G networks are going to affect us all because of the speed. It's a double-edged sword, right? We have faster access to information and data, but that means also that the hackers have faster access to our stuff. And then edge computing. Pay attention to your edge devices, meaning anything that's outward facing. Make sure that you put your firewalls on there. Tracy talked about and that kind of thing. It would probably be well worth your while if you take a formal a Cisco type course or networking type course, at least start watching lots of valid YouTube videos on this kind of thing and understand how to protect that outer rim in your edge network. So this is pretty much my summary of all of those thoughts here. If you do these things, you're going to put yourself in the best position to defend your networks.
Right. Thank you, Dr. John Nicholas. Thank you. All right. Next up, another doctor, Phil Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Will you entrust me with the power?
You have the power.
I'm a speed clicker, so I go very fast. So John invited me to be on this panel, and I said, "Are you sure I'm a general manager? I don't know anything." And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was sort of where this interfaces with the people and our legal concerns. So one of the things that I know, even though the old school problems that we've all been running into, it's still the same. Nothing has changed. I mean, nothing has changed. We still have staff members that insist on sharing logins. We still have, I literally at one station recently got a phone call from my COO on a Sunday, and she said, "I'm going to the Apple store to get you your gift cards." I'm like, I didn't ask for what? So, I mean, this is not something that we've even solved those problems, right? I mean, we're still having those problems. One of the things that I always try to kind of convince our production team, they always want to have internet access on the edit system. And of course, I'm always afraid that having that out there, as you were saying, John, out there on the internet, what's going to happen to it if it gets taken down? Then we're really in big trouble. So I always do that. I also, we have a habit. I typically work at university stations. We have a habit of saying, well, the university's taking care of it. Yeah, but they don't know what equipment we have out at the transmitter. They don't really get involved in that. So we can't really rely on them to do that, even though they do a great job with regular security.
They're deniers, though.
Yeah, well. Yeah, that too, that too. And of course, one of the things that I've been amazed by already as we're working on our policies around AI at the stations, there are other stations where I've found out that people have uploaded their database into ChatGPT to have it write the thank you letters to people, and I'm like, you realize that's completely not secure. Like, you've literally just done the one thing you're not supposed to do in our world. So it's a really big concern as we look at this. You know, and you probably have heard of ChatGPT. I don't know how much you care about this sort of thing, but this is one of the things that we're looking at very heavily at our station, trying to figure out. I kind of describe it as I have my foot on the gas and the brake at the same time, right? Because there are places where I see a very useful, legitimate purpose to using AI in the work that we do. And there are places where I feel like we got to stay far, far away from it. We need to be thoughtful about that. I don't know if you've watched the demo yet for Firefly. It's mind-boggling to see what it's capable of. And so again, this is one of those pieces of software that it's not. A friend of mine who's a technologist with Dell said to me, "You're currently working with the worst version of AI that's ever going to exist." Think about that for a minute. It's a little bit terrifying. Of course, Microsoft is about to spin out Copilot, so we'll see how that impacts us. And then, of course, Stability AI, if you're in the audio world, right, that's another possibility for you to be dealing with. So we're having a lot of conversations now about policies and how we control things. And I'm sure you all know this sort of thing, so I'm not going to read it to you. Where we're getting into challenges now, especially in public media, is people are zooming ahead using AI. And one of my real concerns with it, forget about the ethics of it, one of my real concerns with it is the models that it was trained on basically were written by a bunch of tech bros in the first 20 years of the internet. It's not fully inclusive. It's not something that it involves a lot of data from other points of view and other perspectives until fairly recent years. It has problems. It has real serious problems in terms of the things that it generates and the bias built into it. So again, this is why gas and the brake for me at the same time. Some of the things that we are looking at using it for, and I do plan to implement it, is, you know, donation appeal emails in the PBS brand. So this helps us, like one of the things we're looking at is you can train it to write in your voice. And so I see a value to that, right? Like, let's work on training it to write in the way that we would normally write, because it will speed up our ability to interact. Let's just not put our database in there, right? It can write the thing, and then we'll do the merge elsewhere. Pledge scripts in station voice. Again, sort of developing that branded appeal and that sort of thing. I see a value to that, right? And that's something that we're definitely looking at doing. Looking at headlines, keywords, and summaries based on video transcripts. Oh, I'm excited about this, right? Think about this giant vat of video that we have on our server, and there's historically been almost no metadata collected, right? It just gets thrown in there and it's in some giant folder. I always describe it like, you know, if all your medical records were in from a hospital were in one big room with everybody else's medical records in a big pile. Go find your records, right? That's how we treat video. This, though, is going to give us an incredibly powerful tool when you look at asset management. So I'm really excited about what the possibilities are there. Taking public safety incidents into newsroom CMS, this is another possibility for us. One of the places where I'm hard on the brake with this, and our staff has varying opinions about this, is on news. I don't believe that it's at a point where we should be using it for reporting. I don't. We can use it for doing research for reporting, but a human needs to be actively engaged in the reporting. Otherwise, I fear for where we're headed, right? So it's very important for us. And then thinking about doing things like having it do translations and things like that. This is going to get easier, better, and faster, as we all know. So that's an important part for us to think about what we're going to do. Of course, you know, we talked earlier about the challenges with bias that are inherent in this system. You don't have to ask. You can see there's plenty of examples of it. Hallucinations or getting it wrong. This was an interesting test done by the Times. They had an article write about how many times the Times has written about AI, and in fact, it made a bunch of things up. So they were able to go back to their databases and say, well, no, this article never actually existed. That's the kind of thing that can happen with this. So again, that's why one foot is heavily on the brake. And of course, unlike classical computing, right, where same input, you get the same output, who knows what you're going to get with generative AI. So it can keep doing things over and over again, which is great. But also, you don't know. And it's a scary part for us to implement in terms of our everyday operation. So, from my perspective, dealing with humans, right, and dealing with our engineering team who are telling me, you need to slow down on this, you need to stop, you need to, wait a minute, we're not ready to deal with this. The humans want to go zipping down the street because they can appreciate the value of this, making their lives easier to get more work done in less time. One of the things, obviously, is we don't want to upload sensitive data. You don't want to publish any AI-generated text. If you're a news organization, as we are, there needs to be human editorial involved in it. If you were going to use it, and we're not at this time, but if we were going to use it in news, we would owe our audience to disclose that. If you're an NPR, PBS station, and you're doing news, the only thing you have is trust. And if people have doubts about your reporting, then you've lost the only thing that you really can count on that makes you matter in that local context. And of course, the free AI tools, of course, went out there on the internet and stole a bunch of things. So one of the things that I've heard, and I haven't been able to verify this, is Adobe's talking about with Firefly, if you get sued, you will be indemnified from using Firefly, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, odd concept.
Yeah. But it's reasonable, right? Because you can do things with Firefly or they're in the style of an artist. And so I think Adobe is basically using their library of materials that you can get access to build everything. But I don't know how we're going to actually be able to defend ourselves legally down the road. If there's a question about the context or something that's written, I don't know how we're going to be able to back that up using things like ChatGPT or Claude. So there's no question we've got challenges in front of us. I know as a human being,
Go ahead, that's that way.
I totally get why people see the value in using these, but like everything else, my concern in this is there are places where I don't believe it's ready, and we need to be very careful about it. And I also know in terms of the conversation we were having earlier, we were talking about how do you convince a general manager to spend money, those kind of things. I will tell you from my perspective, my RF plant is the way that I run my business. So I need to care for it and nurture it and tend it because that's the way I make my money. And it may be that in the future it's more digital dollars than it is RF dollars, but we're not there yet. And so from my perspective, I'm going to always want to have the advice of a good engineer. I was just trained, luckily, for 15 years under Blake Thompson and Rick Kent, who both taught me how to listen to engineers. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
All right. So let's see if we got your slide.
I did. Well, there we go.
All
Hey.
right.
Hey, so I'm not going to read this all to you. I mean, it's just, how many of you have had, or how many of you are the IT department at your station? Okay. How many of you have really given any serious thought to just what you can do in terms of protecting your station, just without spending a lot of money or time? Okay, that's the biggest argument I usually hear when it comes to to doing all of these things, to protecting your station or taking any steps towards cybersecurity. So today I'm going to give you some practical steps that you can take just without spending a lot of money. The biggest commitment is actually just time, and sometimes it's not even that much time to do these things. My familiarity with cybersecurity incidents goes back quite a ways. How many of you remember the Chernobyl virus? Okay, very early. Well, at my first station, KAXE, many years ago when I was still a young green engineer who was basically just figuring out this IT stuff as I went along, setting up an NT network and Novell NetWare and all that other fun stuff. Well, one day I come in and our development director and our underwriting department go, what's going on here? My computer won't boot up. It says it can't find the hard drive. I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then suddenly it started popping up on all of the other systems around the station. I'm going, Oh no. And the virus had been in the news, so I knew exactly what had happened. And come to find out, somebody had in fact clicked on a bogus attachment, and it spread. It spread like wildfire. So from that point on, I learned some very important lessons when it comes to protecting your infrastructure, and it's something that I've carried with me throughout my career. So, like I said, first of all, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but it's an investment of time. The things that you do absolutely positively want to do, you've got to have some kind of firewall, even just a really basic one. Even going down to like Staples or Office Depot or any of the big box stores and just buying pretty much any basic firewall off the shelf will give you more protection than just than nothing. So get a firewall if you don't have one. And this, I'm going to talk mostly about things that would apply to, say, transmitter sites, but this applies at studios too. I would think most of you have probably got some infrastructure at your studios, but if it applies to your transmitter sites as well. So use VPN. Another thing that I don't see a lot of is people who are actually using things like VPN connectivity to their transmitter sites and to their remote sites. They'll just set it out there on the internet and and call it good. Well, I can access it. Well, guess what? If you can access it, so can somebody else anywhere else in the world. So think about setting up VPN on these firewalls, and even the most basic firewalls now will support VPN, and it's really not all that difficult to set up once you kind of start getting into it.
It's a lifesaver. I had to use it this morning.
It really is. I mean, you can basically now, securely be right in front of your stuff without actually connecting physically to your network. It's just as if you're on your network without actually being on your network. And unlike things like port forwarding or whatever, you can get to everything, and you can do it securely. And it's not like using a remote desktop application or something where you have to have something special set up. It's just there. You connect, you're in. So I can't emphasize that one enough. Change default logins and passwords.
If you haven't, you are all in trouble.
Exactly. Somebody, I think, I don't know if he's in the, I don't think he's in the room, but Jeff Welton earlier in the last session mentioned about how every so often he'll go out and he'll look for Nautel transmitters, or he'll go out and look for one of the most infamous ones are the barracks boxes. I'm sure some of you probably use those, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But a lot of times there are like at least 1,100 or so barracks boxes out there right now. Most of them, at least now, some of them have, I haven't tried them all, but the default in the earlier versions was no username, no password. So people would just plug them in, hang them on a public IP address so they could easily get to them later. And guess what? Not only could you get to it, so could anybody else on the internet who wanted to mess with it. And that's your STL. That is your lifeline, your link to your station. So if somebody takes control of that and they change the password, guess what? You're locked out. You've got to go to your site now and physically disconnect it and address the situation. So you want to keep software up to date. And I know we all hate updates, right? We hate the infamous Windows updates. Well, unfortunately, they just come with the deal. They're part of life. I really, really, really discourage running older OSs, older versions that aren't patched, older, anything that's not current and up to date. And yeah, I know there are always going to be some exceptions to that. I know people who still run the old Windows 7, Windows 2000, Windows XP systems because whatever they're attached to, for whatever reason, just does not support a more modern OS. And very expensive pieces of hardware. So I get that. But at the same time, if that's the case, you want to make that an island as much as possible. You do not want that stuff touching the internet at all. But for your day-to-day stuff, as much as possible, and even for your broadcast infrastructure, as much as possible, run current OSs, make sure they're patched, and make sure that they're kept up to date, that you have a program for doing that. Now, if that means that you have to, like put a CD in the on-air studio or something for a while you patch the automation system, well, then so be it. Or what you do is you have a cold standby for your automation that you can patch that. You kind of run them in parallel. You keep that one patched, you bring it on the air, and then you patch the one that the other one that you're using. Things like virtual machines make that even easier because you can do that now without even physically having to change any hardware. So, and then finally, you're under the do category. Train, train, train. The most important link in the chain is the human element. I can't emphasize this enough. Somewhere there's a graphic where you've got the IT guy who's spent millions of dollars on IT infrastructure and security and software and all of that stuff. And then you've got Dave in accounting who clicks that link or opens that attachment and releases all kinds of chaos. Well, I mean, in an ideal world, you've got your system is all set up such that even if Dave in accounting clicks that link or opens that attachment, it's caught. But obviously, we don't live in a perfect world, and hackers and all of these people with malicious intent, they start, they're getting more and more clever as they, every day. Some of these phishing attacks are getting incredibly convincing. So
Detailed.
And detailed, yeah. So it's not so much anymore. You look at it, you see the grammar errors, the spelling errors. It looks like, in some cases, it looks like it's coming from somebody within your organization. Best thing to do is just contact that person and find out. Hey, did you really send this? Especially if it's some kind of strange request.
Did you really want all those gift cards?
Did you really want all those gift cards? Yeah. So I'm glad you caught that. So yeah. And there's a site called KnowBefore, actually, knowbefore.com. It was operated by the late Kevin Mitnick, who was a very well-known hacker, world-renowned, infamous. I mean, the guy went to jail, but then after he kind of got out, and he started up as what they call a white hat hacker business now, and he just passed away recently, unfortunately. But that site has got some excellent resources. There are some paid services on there which will kind of help with training of your employees and help with even sending out phishing tests. A lot of IT departments are doing this now, where they will send out test emails to the employees to see how many actually catch it and how many report it. And that's actually a really good technique. I mean, some of us cry foul when that happens, especially if my phone helpfully previews a link for me and I get tagged, even though I knew it was bogus. But it's definitely something that's worth looking into. I mean, that is by far your final line of defense is your people. So things you don't want to do not poke holes through your firewall. If you've got a firewall and you start doing port forwarding through that, you've just put a screen door on the submarine. So security through obscurity is really almost as bad as no security at all. Okay. Don't put devices directly on public IP addresses. If you've got a public IP address and you've got a device, you really need to ask yourself, does this thing really need to have a public IP address available to the world? And more often than not, unless you're running a server or something, or a cluster of servers, the answer is no, it does not. That's where the VPNs come in. Again, use a VPN to get back inside your network. Don't just throw that thing out there on the internet and call it good. Look, I can get into it. Yep, so can everybody else. Don't use outdated operating systems and software versions, just like we talked about. Again, as much as practical, and if you have to, make sure it's isolated. Don't blindly answer the unusual emails, text messages, or voicemails without directly verifying with the person they came from that, yes, they in fact sent this. Like maybe you get a strange email that has an attachment that claims it's from HR or from accounting, right? Looks all the world like it belongs, but you weren't expecting anything from HR. You weren't expecting anything from accounting. Call them, the person it purports to be from, and say, hey, did you send this? Is this legit? And verify it. Trust but verify. The rest of this basically goes along the same lines. Don't open attachments you're not expecting. Don't click links in emails. Always verify with the source. So that's kind of my spiel. These are the essentials that I want to drive home to broadcasters, especially small and medium broadcasters who don't have a cybersecurity department, don't have a full IT department. These are all practical steps that you can take that cost little or no money and just take some time to actually do. So there we go.
All right. Pass it on down to Wayne there.
All right, thank you. Well, from the perspective of the group, you've heard certainly a lot of individual things to do. In fact, often there's an endless list of things to do. A lot of the rules, I guess, that we come across, maybe that's handed to you by your corporate IT department, or maybe if you're in a regulatory environment. There are some principles that come into mind. A couple of the key ones is simply a defense in depth. And that simply says you provide multiple defense mechanisms. In other words, to not rely solely on one type of protection. A few years back, simply having a firewall was adequate cybersecurity protection. That is certainly still important today, but there needs to be more than just a firewall. Another principle is that of least privilege, which is simply granting the least amount of rights to users and also applications. And I'll emphasize applications because often the focus is on the user rather than that application as well to perform whatever the business function that needs to be done. And then finally, I guess what I think of as the Ohm's law of cybersecurity is the CIA triad, which simply states that the goals of IT security is to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your IT resources. And of course, those IT resources might be the hardware infrastructure, it might be your network, it also might be applications, it also might be the data. In our case, that data is often program material or our content that we're broadcasting. CISA has already been mentioned as an excellent resource. One of the key things that I think they do provide is the training materials that are available to you and just some summary slides of some of their recommendations. One area that is also beneficial is what is known as the KEV catalog, or the Known Exploitable Vulnerability Catalog, which is simply a listing of all of the basically known vulnerabilities that exist. Before this presentation, I took a quick look, and there's a little over 1,000 entries in that catalog of also then what to do about those. So that is often can be a good tool when you're trying to figure out what direction do I go or what do I need to prioritize and so forth. So in trying to summarize things, this is one of my, I guess, many lists that I've created for different presentations of kind of those best practice things to do with protection for particularly a broadcast infrastructure. These practices, again, are all based on the cybersecurity principles. And again, as was mentioned earlier, going back to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is really the Bible that we work from. And with that, that's where a lot of rules. So keep in mind, however, phishing is alive and well. That's already been mentioned. If you look back at some of the major cybersecurity events that have occurred, those you've read about in the trade publications. What you probably have not read about is the little guy. Shannon mentioned that small station or, the mom and pop radio or TV station. You often do not hear about those events in the news. But again, phishing is alive and well. So again, I won't read through all of these. There are a lot of detail of trying to summarize. This presentation will be available, so I'll skip kind of through these. Again, a lot of very specifics to do, depending on what. One thought, though, the building into your cybersecurity plan needs to be a what do I do if I do have an incident? In other words, I have a recovery plan, not something I have to figure out when an event occurs. I have a plan in place. Part of that plan may be redundancy in equipment. Certainly data backups is an important part of that plan. Whereas we're here to talk about cybersecurity today, that backup also might be useful to you in natural disasters, weather events in Central Texas. From where I'm from, tornadoes are the big threat that we're concerned about. Obviously, if you're in the Gulf Coast or the coast, hurricanes and that light, but also, as I think Shane mentioned, the weakest point is often a human. Mistakes do occur. Certainly not to say that there's intentional things that happen. Those can, of course, happen because, disgruntled employees or whatever may be, but there's simply human mistakes that's made, and often that backup process and that recovery plan can be useful to recover from those. And again, keep, driving on about default passwords and stuff, also staff education in terms of the phishing and all of the various forms of that, as mentioned, is getting very sophisticated. So with some closing thoughts, again, cybersecurity is an ongoing process. It's not a project. Like, as broadcast engineers, we sort of like to do projects. In fact, that new project is usually pretty exciting because it's something new. We get that studio built or that transmitter site built. We go on to the next project. Well, cybersecurity certainly has some implementation steps, but it takes care in feeding that ongoing process to look after. Monitor your infrastructure. In other words, know what is normal also means knowing when something is not normal. Of course, there's two types, organizations, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked, and you don't want to be in that category. And again, have that plan in place to know how to recover and restore and return things to normal here. Again, adopt the defense in depth approach. In other words, multiple barriers or multiple layers of protection, beginning all the way at the physical layer of your network infrastructure to the physical devices. Implement port security on managed Ethernet switches. In other words, control what device can be attached to a switch port. If a foreign device is attached, then it's simply that port is disabled, and hopefully as the network administrator or network engineer might get then a notification there's been a foreign device attached and so forth. And finally, there are just a lot of details, things to be done. You think you've done them all. How do you know that? Well, I'm a proponent of using penetration testing. In other words, verification. As broadcast engineers, we're used to what? Making measurements and verifying system performance, and penetration is a way to do that. And certainly that can get pretty geeky. Kevin Mitnick was mentioned as a hacker, but simply penetration testing is using hacker tools to proactively verifying access, because you want to reduce your visibility, actually ideally to nothing, but sometimes there has to be that public internet activity. And yes, there are plenty of geek hacker tools out there to do that. We mentioned barracks boxes and Autel transmitters. There's tools we can simply take and scan the public internet with a tool such as Nmap, specifically looking for, again, IP-based devices with open ports. And there's also some web-based tools. Shodan is probably the most popular one. It's out there. Options that exist in that is even to scan devices and look for devices with default login information still there. Those are quick things that you can use to simply verify that public visibility that you have. And then finally, once again, about the phishing is alive and well. Yes, you can spend a lot of money on cybersecurity, and it can be instantly destroyed with a successful phishing attempt.
All right, thank you, Wayne. All right, we've got a few minutes left. I know we've got a hard end on this because the SBE event is happening shortly after. Questions from the audience? Got a whole panel of experts here. Go ahead.
The wherever the donator resides, that law applies. So even though in Ohio we don't have that same strictness, if you do have somebody from California, you're going to be held liable by California.
Go ahead.
Well, generally, if it, okay, so he asked if, he said, I say not to poke holes in the firewall, but he asks if it's okay to poke one for the VPN. And generally, the firewall is going to take care of that. They might like mask the port so that it's still available, but maybe not readily apparent. Things like turning off the ping response from the firewall. I know it's a useful troubleshooting tool, but again, the less visibility you have, the less likely you are to be hit. So I guess the short answer to that is yes, but generally the firewall is going to do that for you when you set up the VPN. So generally.
Okay, anything else? All right, any closing thoughts? We got just a couple minutes left. Go ahead.
Shane had mentioned default passwords on barracks boxes and that type of stuff in his presentation. I think it was 2018, 2019, there was actually a list of that type of radio broadcast gear. The public IP that it resided on, not just usernames and not just default usernames and passwords. It listed all the devices that had those, but then it also contained a number of those types of devices that had weak passwords. And it was literally just a who's who. It didn't identify who the radio company was. It just listed the public IP and all of that information for large numbers of broadcasters. We used it as an internal mechanism to make sure that we didn't have any exposed devices. But that information was actually just on a public website at the time. But you're finding more and more information on the dark web about literally every specialization and focal area of your company. And it's very important that you have some type of effort, I think, focused at understanding what of your email addresses within your organization and that type of stuff have associated data in the dark web. XDR tools and some of those types of tools will do that for you automatically with the association between your email addresses and data pulled out of the dark web. But I think having some type of attention to that in your cyber efforts is important.
Right.
The other thing I would add real quick, Blake, is if you think phishing has been a problem before, just wait till they start implementing generative AI to write it, because it'll scrape your information off the web and the person's information and combine those. So it's going to become much more convincing.
Right. So, I mean, these are not just theoretical risks. I mean, I run across the attitude a lot of times, well, I'm small. Why would they care about me? Well, it doesn't matter what size you are. It doesn't matter if you're a small broadcaster, a big broadcaster. I mean, like I said, I hate to keep banging on the barracks boxes, but they're the most they're the most common example. I mean, there have been very real cases of those being compromised, a very undesirable program source being placed on the air, some that could get you in big trouble with the FCC, for example, and not only that, but your RDS as well, any of your metadata, same thing. So this stuff is really important, and like I said, it doesn't really take a whole lot. You don't have to go to really extensive, super. I mean, it's great. The more you can do, the better. But even just doing the basics will help considerably. So,
Okay. All right. One more.
And just one final thought, we've thrown a lot of jargon at you today. And so white hat hacking, penetration testing, and ethical hacking are all the same things. And if you want to really get good at it, go to Offensive Security, and they have training courses and certifications that you can go through.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That was an excellent presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Blake and panelists, for a great conversation, if not a bit scary. I know there were a lot of slides and very small print, and it was probably difficult to read. We will have these presentations all posted on our website, and a reminder that we've recorded all of these sessions, and those will be posted on the MBMTC website as soon as we've got them ready to go, and we'll send out a notification to let you know that. So this concludes MBMTC 2023, and the SBE annual membership meeting will be downstairs in rooms D180 and 181. You can take either the elevators right out here or the escalators down to the first floor. They've got signs posted. Thank you all for being here, and special thanks to our exhibitors, our door prize donors, and especially our sponsors. Please be sure to use the QR code that's on your attendee packet to access our conference evaluation. We want your feedback on what you liked, what you'd like to see us do next year, particularly session ideas, speaker ideas are welcome. If you want a door prize this afternoon, please stop by the registration desk to pick that up on your way out. And if you still need a parking pass to get out of one of the garages, we've got those at the registration desk as well. So thank you all so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you.